The Game Schooler podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Adventure Party, our game of the week, discuss icons versus text in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high five designers. Welcome to the Game Schooler podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's going on, Doug? Great to see you. Great to talk games here.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a while, but it hasn't.
No, episode. Are we on 178? Do I have that right, or am I off?
Yes.
Yeah. We're trucking right along, closing in on 200 episodes.
Will we get to that before the end of the year or not?
Yeah, we should. If we do what we do and we do it well, I think it will be right at the end of the year.
Interesting.
That's cool. So I actually want to throw a curveball, if that's okay. I'd like to lead with a little bit of what's awesome and then come back to some follow-up. Can I just say a quick thing that's awesome?
Sure.
I was traveling for work last week. I was in a very cool city. I was in Boston, and I did what I like to do when I travel, but I actually went on the right day. I did a board game meetup at a very cool little establishment called Taverns and Tales. And it was a tavern, but they also had delicious coffee and some wonderful pastries, I might add. And I got to play Wormspan. So there I was on work, working hard, and 7 o'clock at night, the last thing I wanted to do was work, and I was missing my family, so I jumped in and went to a meetup and just had a great time. I don't want to call out the people that I played with because I don't actually have their permission, but somebody did a great job teaching Wormspan and two other players. It was about 3 hours with a nice little half-hour intermission in there, so people could load up on their beverage of choice. I made the mistake of getting an Americano at about 8:30 at night. But the game is cool too. So that was one thing I just wanted to report back to you. I was a little cynical of going into it because they're like, okay, Wingspan with dragons. But no, there's some other things going on. I think you and I might get that played in the next 6 months or so, possibly. So,
well, it helped that you mopped the floor with everyone too while you were there.
No. It was close. It was very close. Knowing how to play Wingspan did help. I did not mop the floor. You're gonna get negative reviews if some of those fellow game players. I was very close. I was fortunate in how things turned out. But yeah.
Okay.
All that to say, though, that's what's awesome about our hobby. You can be anywhere and find a group to play games with you. I mean, you really can. Not anywhere. There are some rural, remote parts. I get that, and rural, remote parts. But in a lot of cities and medium-sized areas, even where we live, there are meetups and different things happening at different establishments and game stores, and that was fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, you've got the personality for that. I know that there's a lot of people would feel uncomfortable being in a, not necessarily for you, but in a strange city and going into a game meetup by themselves.
Yeah.
Could be frightening or scary. So,
and that's a good point.
Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but it probably comes easier to you than most, I would say.
Yeah, and I've had enough experiences of shame and embarrassment where I've got some armor, a little bit of thick skin, and can walk into some of those situations. But no, that's and it's maybe you're right. Maybe but maybe it's unique. I don't know.
It's cool that it's available.
It is.
That's the important thing.
It is, and I love it. And
whether you're capable of doing it is one thing, but the fact that it is available and any time that I can say, being more of an introvert myself, any time that I've put myself out there and gone and all of a sudden whether it's at a convention and you sign up for a game or something like that, every time I've done that, I've always sat at the table and everybody's been friendly and by the end of the game, you feel like you have new friends. And
Yep.
so,
And that's how I felt. It's great to engage with the
as
hobby.
don't be afraid to put your foot in there and go and try something new. So cool.
Yeah.
All right. What else?
Well, I've got a lot, but I'll send it back to you. Do you have anything for follow-up?
I do. I wanted to thank Chris Leader last week for being so generous with his time. It was a great interview talking with him, and it's always fascinating for me, and I think it is for you, Michael, but just talking to somebody that has so many different hats. It's one thing when you're talking to a publisher or a game store owner or something like that. Chris seems to be wearing a lot of different hats, whether it's helping develop games, publish games, design games. That was an interesting.
Edit rule books.
Yeah, exactly. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, go back and listen to it because it's a really cool conversation. And like I said, Chris was so generous with his time that I feel like we got to ask all the questions we wanted to ask and pretty wide-ranging interview.
Yeah, that's great. That's excellent. It was fun to see him in that setting too. He really rocked it. He's great at demoing a game, great at talking for a few minutes at a convention, but for him to really take over the Game Schooler podcast, just a very dynamic personality, and I can't wait to run into him again down the road.
Yeah. Yep.
Good.
Go ahead. Any other follow-up for you?
Yeah, I've got a few minutes of follow up here, Doug. So I don't know if you're ready for this because I'm going to talk some solo games.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we got the raised eyebrow.
Awesome,
we got the raised eyebrow. That was good. A little condescension here on an audio podcast.
Not good enough to be awesome in gaming. It's slumping into the follow-up.
I'm putting it in follow-up because I talked about this months ago, and our astute listeners who are also on our Discord channel in the solo channel, which by and large is just me taking some pictures of games that I'm playing.
I thought only one user could be in there at a time.
Oh, well played. No, a few months ago, I got a game in the mail via Kickstarter, and it really was one of those moments of, what am I doing here? Because I don't have other humans to play this game with, and I have two other solo games in front of it. I need to play these games and make decisions on them. And the game that arrived in the mail was Inventions, Evolutions of Ideas, Vital Lacerda game. And it was one that, 2 years ago, I played the Gallerist. I played it solo. I enjoyed it. And then this Kickstarter came out, and I actually put some discernment into, do I really want to try that? And man, I had a blast playing it. I really, really did. And I think I talked about it a couple of episodes ago, that I had a gamer goal. I was going to do Expeditions and Dead Reckoning and Evolution of Ideas all, before we go to Gen Con. And when I was looking at this game and I had just come out of a Dead Reckoning spell, I was like, how am I going to get this done here? And so and this next part I believe I shared with you, but I gave myself 3 hours of time to learn the game and then another 3 hours to play it. And got through it. Got through it all right. And did we talk about this already on air?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. I've had it in my notes for a week or so I want to make sure I'm not repeating everything verbatim.
I mean, I think your strategy you've talked about before.
Yeah, the 3 hour.
Into.
Yeah, and so the Summer Solo Spectacular that's fun to just me is now done and wrapped up. And from that experience, I'm feeling comfortable and okay with moving on from Expeditions and letting it go to somebody else's house. I'm ecstatic to keep Dead Reckoning. And I also really liked Inventions, Evolutions of Ideas from Vital Lacerda. And I think the thing that I learned from it, last time I went through one of these solo binges, I felt like I had to evangelize the game and convert my friends into playing it in order for me to consider it a good game. And I made that mistake, Doug.
Or justify keeping it. Right?
Yes, that's what I just said. I made that mistake. Hey, go back, listen to it. I made that mistake with Darwin's Journey, and I'm not going to make that mistake with these games. It's just that, I'm kind of at that point of I don't think I can bring too many more games into my house that are just solo games. Like how many hobby level, 10-hour plus games does one human need? So in the solo gaming thread on our Discord, I would just love to hear how people who go through those, binges of playing games solo for a variety of reasons, how many do you keep in your collection at a time? And I know that's very different if a person has 100 games to if a person has 400 games in the collection. We get in all those variables, but I'm glad that I went through that with the learning of it. The game itself, Inventions, Evolutions of Ideas, is cool. You start out in the Stone Age and you get these invention. It breaks the actual invention and innovation down into different phases, and you're trying to get ideas out into different parts of the world. And Ian O'Toole art is just beautiful. So that's that. I could keep going on. I have more notes, but I think I'll wrap that up and just let you and the listeners know that I did that. I feel good about it. I'm going to keep moving on with my life.
Well, I think it's hard when evaluating games in your collection because in two ways. One of them, when I look at stuff that it's on my shelf and I haven't played it yet, and there's part of me that's like, it's a double-edged sword because you feel like you're giving up hope of like what that game could be. Like that could be my favorite game, but I haven't played it. But then I look at it and say, yeah, but it's been on my shelf for 6 months and there's nothing that's drawn me to get it to the table. So which one is it? And it's always, I think that's hard, and to you making that point of like, I want to get these played so I know yay or nay and get them out of here. And it's like, I try and do it as much as I can as well, but sometimes it gets so hard. It's like, I know you have games on your shelf that you haven't played. I have games on my shelf that I haven't played. And it's like, should the drive to play them more indicate whether you should be holding on to them, or do you just have to kind of let go of like, for whatever reason, it just didn't sing to me enough to even get it off the shelf, so I need to move on, even if it could be a game I really like.
Yeah, and I think the biggest variable with a lot of those, and whether you're playing with other people or playing them individually with just all by yourself, is time, right? Yeah. We only get 168 in a week. We get 24 in a day. Those are the hours that we have. And so if a game is going to, if a single game is going to pull at 10 to 12 of those hours, over how many weeks, how many days, that I think that's a very real thing. And we definitely talk about it on our show, but it's not one you always hear about in the hobby. In the hobby, it's about, you got to get into the next thing, or how could you let go of the Ironclad edition of Expeditions? How could you let that go? And it's one of those things, well, where does the game fit right now for me in my life and time? And maybe it's just we're both very busy people, so maybe it's just a factor that I'm hyper aware of. And if I'm sitting down at the table, that means that I'm not spending and playing a game alone. It means I'm not spending time with someone else in my family, right? So that's also a real factor that comes into the equation as well.
Well, it also comes down to, the past couple of weeks, we've had a couple of game nights where, we're playing 3 or 4 smaller games, and you're getting, 3 solid games out of it where you're like, oh, this is really good, or I want to talk about this on the podcast. This might be game of the week. And when you can get 3 of those in for the same time, when you're talking about that time management, when I can get 3 or 4 of those in my night, as opposed to one, and then hope that the one is really, really good enough to even personally want to go back to. But if that thing misses, gosh, is it a dagger of, man, we could have played 3 other games. We could have played 4 other games.
Yeah.
And I, even if you're talking about a family game night or things like that, just that quantity of time compared to experience. And, sometimes you only can get the family together for a couple hours every week or every other week. And it's like, ooh, I want to try this out. But if it bombs, I might not get them back for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff to juggle as a family gamer and somebody that is just part of your hobby, right? Or part of your life, not your entire life.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you touched on, some of it is unique to us because we have a weekly podcast,
Yeah, sure.
and so that's where if you get a game and it bombs, oh man, that doesn't feel good. No.
Yeah. No, instead, if you're at home, it's more about the money that you may have sunk into it as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. Exactly.
So, all right. Well, moving on to some more positive stuff. We played a game.
Did solo gaming bring you down that much?
Yeah, it's just a real downer.
Oh
for me.
gosh. All right.
I like to sit in my solitude and paint minis, Michael. I don't have time for crunchy rule sets and 3-hour games.
Give me a 30-hour rule book. I'm starting to, because I know it's not going to be forever, but for the next 5 or 10 years, hopefully I'll be able to keep learning these games and having fun with them. Back to you, Doug.
Yeah. So we got to play a game that was on my want-to-play shelf for a while, but it's one that you just kind of need the right group to get it to the table, and that was a game called Almost Innocent. The publisher is Kolossal Games. It came out in 2023. The designer is Philippe Attali, and the art is by Satoshi Matsuura. And in Almost Innocent, it is a cooperative deductive game, or deduction game, in which everybody is trying to figure out, in this case, or starting in the early scenarios, a victim, a crime, a scene, and an evidence, right?
Yep.
And so the person to your right is the harbinger of your information, and you are giving the answers to the people on your left. So kind of works around the table that way. So in the game that we played, Michael had the things that I was trying to figure out, which were mine. What was my crime? Which was my victim? That type of thing.
I had 4 cards in my hand. Each card had one of those pieces.
Yep. So, and then meanwhile, Michael's trying to figure out what his are from the person on his right. So, and you do that. It's on a grid. All of the characters, victims, scenes, objects, and things like that are all on a grid, a 6x6 grid on the center of the board, and you are asking questions with clue tokens, which are either how many of my clues are in this row, or specifically, is my victim in this row? Is my evidence in this row? And it is really interesting. And deduction games are hard, I've found, to get families to play. You kind of have to have people at the same kind of intellectual level a lot of times, that are kind of functioning on the same speed. I don't know that I've ever played a cooperative deductive game, and it was really fascinating how much of the skill that I think came out in that game, which was selflessness, in asking clues that because when I'm asking for a question, I ask the question, then everybody else gets to answer that same question for the person to their left. And so there's a lot of times where the best kind of approach is to ask a question that's not necessarily helpful for you, or you don't know if it's helpful for you, but you know that it's going to be helpful information to the person that you have their solution to.
Yeah, and the information processing in that game is outstanding. There is some downtime as people think through the different possibilities, but it's not a bad downtime where the game stops. It's very quiet, almost like I'm working out this problem based on the limited information that I have. Oh, I just worked it out. And that was a very unique gaming experience. That was I had a ton of fun playing it. I really did. It took me a little while to catch what was going on. It was also the 3rd out of 4 games that we played in the night. You know what I mean? So it might not have been as fresh, but about halfway through, once numbers were getting called out and places were getting eliminated, and I really thought the components are great with the dry erase boards. It was a ton of fun. Yeah,
it was really cool too. The idea of there are several moments that happen every game, I think, for every person at the table as they're solving their solution, which is because of the way that the board is laid out and that you have all of the things kind of intermingled. There are a handful of times throughout the game where you get a piece of information that doesn't seem like it's that important. And then it kind of opens up for you where you're like, oh, wait, if that's that, that means I can cross off all this other stuff,
Yeah.
which now I'm starting to, where in like a game of Clue, it's like, all right, I've seen all the weapons, so I know that it's the candlestick. And that's not helping you with any of your other things. This game has a little bit of a domino where because I can cross off everything in this row, now all of a sudden I know, oh, wait, now my scenes are getting reduced and now my victims are getting reduced. And I think everybody in the game had 2 or 3 of those moments every time that we played where it was like, oh, wait, yeah, that. Oh, I just figured this out because of the logic of that, which was really cool how that came together. So
Well, and I had 33% of the information. I knew where your stuff was.
Yeah.
So knowing that allowed me to eliminate other possibilities as I try to figure out where my stuff is. The other thing that I just loved about it was the flow. There's a little bit of zaniness to it as, all right, I know where Doug's stuff is at, but the person on my right's tracking my stuff and making sure I don't get confused with the locations and the places. I thought the colors were outstanding, how they differentiated, and the production was really good. It was a good game.
Yeah, so check that out. I think it's probably going to be something that, what we say, 12 plus probably? 10,
Yeah,
12
I
plus
definitely
is
say 12 plus.
just to kind of, there's a little
Level of independence and
mental
comprehension.
processing
Yeah,
that you've got to do while you're playing that game. So, but check it out. It's a pretty cool one, and happy to get that one to the table. Any other ones you want to talk about? You want to go to another one? Yeah, bring it up.
Yeah, we played an awesome game from Manny Vega, and this did not involve dragons. Can I say that? I didn't see any dragons in it. Manny Vega is the designer of Flamecraft, a game of the week that you should definitely track down and give us 5 stars because we crushed it. But this game is called Caper Cards, and it takes a blackjack mechanism, and essentially you have to beat the dealer 4 times in a row. You've got to beat the deck 4 times in a row to win the game. It's a cooperative blackjack. And Doug and I just played it 2-player, but we ran it back multiple times. And let's say you beat the dealer in that first hand. Well, now the dealer gets an ability, and all clubs cards are going to be +2. Okay, you beat him that time. Then the next time, all diamonds are going to be -2. So you're having to juggle that level of information with your partner. And what I didn't intentionally talk much about were the card abilities, because I think if you want to touch on that, Doug, or just talk about what makes the game awesome.
Yeah, so every card, I believe, has an ability of some sort or the other. And so, for example, a 2, you can put a 2 out there, but it is going to flip another card. So a 6 could become a 9, or a 10 could become a 1. And so there are different ways. The 7 eliminates, is that the one that eliminates a card?
Yeah, 7 takes down an odd card.
So an odd card that was already played. And so you only have, in a 2-player game, we had 4 cards, and you need to play 4 cards as part of your crew. So you're playing out these crew members, and then hopefully you're above, you can't go over 21, but you need to be above what the reward is.
You got to beat the dealer.
And it starts out with a base level of 11 on the standard mode. And then the reward or the treasure card is going to add between 5 and 8 to that total. So you're going to be, at minimum, shooting for trying to beat a 16 to a 19, but you don't know which one it's going to be until you've played all of your cards. So you're trying to get as close to 21 as you can. And the way that you can manipulate those cards are really interesting. And it really felt like a mixture of a blackjack game with a trick-taking game in a way, because it's like you're trying to almost win this trick by playing 4 cards. But the way that you can manipulate it and, okay, now we're too high, we need to go lower. I only have a couple of cards left. You know, what cards does Michael have? Does he have low cards or high cards? So I don't want to load it up with high cards in case he he has high cards, and just and you can't communicate with one another as far as what cards you have in your hand. And so it's a really fascinating game that was just kind of a spur of the moment. I got a copy of it and was like, yeah, let's try it out. It seemed interesting. The designer, like Michael said, Manny Vega, it plays in about 20 minutes. And
well, and it teaches so easily.
yeah,
I mean, if anyone's ever played blackjack, or even if they haven't, you could probably just, I mean, the fact that the dealer's going to start out at 11, and then the only thing where it takes a little bit of getting used to are how the dealer gets powers added each hand. And that's where I feel like our second game, we got much more used to it and talking it through like you would a cooperative. But like you said, it felt like a trick taker, because the person who's leading has the boss card and they're leading out that first card, and that switches each round, in between each round. So yeah, that was a fun one. I've got a copy of it here. Really looking forward to playing it with. I'm hoping to get to the table tonight, actually, with my 14-year-old. This one's from the Critical Role universe. Is that right? I want to make sure we're getting that right.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's like Series 3.
Yeah, Darrington Press, Manny Vega, and David Rodriguez is the artist.
So that was awesome. So those are some awesome games. We talked about it earlier, but we do have a Discord server, gameschooler.com/Discord. Sign up for that. Join the community. There's a lot of awesome folks in there with questions, comments, and everything in between. Continue to spread the word about the podcast. We appreciate it every time you do. Fill out a review wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify or iTunes or anywhere you can drop a review and let people know that we're out there. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you have questions or comments, reach out to us. Email at gameschooler.com. Again, email at gameschooler.com. Now, let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Adventure Party, the role-playing game. Doug, give us the stats.
Yes, this was published or coming out very soon.
Now-ish.
It just came out not too long ago, I believe, which is 2024 Smirk and Dagger Games. The designer is David Smith and Travis Winstead. The art is by Graffiti Studio. 3 to 8 players, 30 to 60 minutes, ages 10 plus, and I think 10 plus is probably pretty accurate on that one.
I do too.
And is going to fall in the line of a family game for us. In this cooperative guessing game, 3 to 8 players take the roles of adventurers in a classic fantasy role-playing world, facing monsters and attempting heroic deeds. Over the course of 3 adventure scenarios, the party will work together and collectively attempt to score the most experience points possible. Players will take turns rolling their 20-sided die in secret, and based on how well or poorly they rolled, they will describe what their character does, first outlining their plans and then describing the outcome of their actions. The goal of which is to provide enough detail so that the GM or guest master for that turn can guess the number that they rolled as closely as possible, earning the entire party experience points.
Such a good game.
So what happens is you have a stack of 3 scenarios. Before the game starts, you're going to get a little character sheet, and you can go kind of in depth or as little depth as you want to start the game. And it's going to give you, you pick out a name. It kind of gives you some guiding points of what am I adventuring for, and there's a whole list of things. You can circle things, whether you're vanquishing evil or you want, you've got ambition, you want to leave your past behind. So all these different kind of objectives of what's moving you and pushing you forward. And
why are you going all shy on me, Doug?
Why?
Well, I mean, my 14-year-old and I, we got to see you in all your theatrical glory. Doug's theater degree came to full effect in Adventure Party. I thought you were going to come in and just be full character, man. Okay, keep talking about the game. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then you've got some personality traits that you can do. So are you cautious or impulsive? And again, you can do this or you don't need to, but it is really fun to kind of pick things that are against your character, or like, I'm going to make a real broody character, or someone really confident, or that type of thing. You get a little player sheet. So in this case, like this is the monk. On it, it's going to tell you, what the kind of tropey parts of what a monk is in fantasy role playing, and how they, if you're a rogue, these are kind of the traits of a rogue, and what kind of abilities they're good at, what kind of weapons they use, and things like that kind of give you a baseline guide of just kind of creating a character. And then on the side, it says here a 20, a 10, a 9, and a 1 as die results. So that's going to determine, if you get a 20, that's a stunning success. If you got a 1, it's a total failure. 9, ooh, you were so close, but you still failed. And 10, you did it, but just barely. And so you have 3 scenarios laid out. You read the first scenario, and then each player is going to have 2 item cards. And you can use your item cards. You basically formulate a plan, and you say, well, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to use my boots of wishing, and I'm going to use that. And then you roll. And then, based on how you rolled, you are going to tell a story of what happened. So if you were, really successful, you're trying to convey that. If you were a complete failure, you convey that through your story. You, of course, can't say, I was too close to getting it, or anything like that. That's cheesy. It kind of takes the fun out of it. And
that was really cheesy. I agree.
Yeah.
Keep going.
But it is really cool as you're telling your story to and one of the other players is going to be guessing they're the main guesser, and their points, how close they do, give you experience points. But everybody else at the table also gets to guess, but their kind of margin for victory or for getting points is a little bit smaller. So the way that it works is if Michael rolled a 13 and I guess a 13 on his turn, we get 5 experience points. If he rolled a 13 and I guess a 14, I'm 1 away, which means we get 4 experience points. And that goes all the way down to getting nothing. If you are one of the other players at the table, you basically have a variance of 1 or 2. You can either get it or be up to 2 away and still get some personal glory, is what they call. So you're trying to collect that. There's no set winning condition. As far
Everything
as
that you do contributes to the team's overall goals, which I think just plays right into the essence of a RPG game,
Yep. And then the thing about it too is that while you're playing the game, you cannot say you're battling a monster. You can't kill the monster because the other people at the table still need to fight it. In the same way that if you roll a 1, you don't die. You might be gravely injured, but you have to keep it going for other players to contribute to it. And only the person with the last person in the story, they can close out the loop.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, it has like that improv level of like, I have to leave it over for Michael. I can't have a 20 on my second turn. And then I've killed the dragon and Michael's like, what do I do?
So now I leave the cave.
So that being said, that's how you play the game. There are different, guys, this is a stack of adventures that you can go on.
Yeah.
And I've played it 3 or 4 times, I believe. And, we've gone through a 10th of the scenarios that are in the game. There are things of, one was a pickpocket quest. I had to try and steal something. We had to rescue people from flying dragons, get a dwarf out of a tricky situation. All of those kind of tropey fantasy things all come up in this game. And I'm just before I send it over to you, Michael, I'm going to say what I really like about this is that I, as a part of this podcast, have been looking the entire time, 178 episodes, for a storytelling game that I thought we could talk about and that would work with the widest group of people, because I have a litany of experiences of storytelling games where people at the table don't feel comfortable. Somebody at the table is really good at it, and other ones are just embarrassed. They don't want to participate. This one, I have had fun with people that almost give one-word answers and not, getting really into role-playing at all. And I've had people that really get into it over the top, myself included, and they all work together because there's enough of a framework and enough storytelling crutches for you to work off of, whether it's your character, the weapons and the traits that you're good at, or your item cards, to be able to throw something together, even if it's like, I'm going to throw this rock at the dragon. And that, to me, is why this game works so well, and how I'm so excited to talk about it and share it, because I've been looking for something that will work with, people that are more shy and intimidated by a game like that.
Yeah, I want to react to what you said. You've talked often, especially lately, about the storytelling skill gap that occurs in a lot of games, especially if you're playing with kids and even your own parents, right? If you bring 70 years a range of 70 years to the table, it's going to be tough to have an authentic storytelling experience. And the other thing that I just want to mention, and you were talking about it, talking around it, the game does a phenomenal job of giving players enough language so that they don't have to know how a role-playing game works to feel like they're playing a role-playing game. You have a wizard, you have a D20 dice, go to work. To the point where it will tell you your personality type. It will tell you the type of quest that you are drawn to, and you can circle it. But then you got to give your wizard a name, right? The game's not going to name your wizard for you. And those little basic pieces that are in there, that framework to get it started, I watched our wives kind of struggle with it a little bit, but eventually I feel like they got the hang of it. And then I watched my 14-year-old who has a D&D campaign happening at this time tomorrow in our own house, just completely take to this game and have a joy with a tabletop game that I haven't seen in a while. I mean, jumped right in. It allowed you to really be dynamic. It allowed all of us to kind of go on this adventure together. The other thing that I love is the language that's built in around if you're successful or not. So I threw the rock at the dragon, and I was barely successful. However, the dragon is now really upset, and it's running at us. So then people know, like, okay, barely successful, higher than a 10, but based on what else was provided, there's no way that thing was a 13. So now, did Michael roll a 10, 11, or a 12? Which one do we think? And then so you get that right away in the game, you kind of know where somebody's going. And then after a few rounds around the table, it just amazed me at how close people were.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like, how do I convey the difference between a 14 and a 15? What's the difference between a 1 and a 2? And one of the notes that I have on this game
a lot
is that this is a game that is fun. And I think it says it right on the box, but it's whether you roll high or low, it is just as fun. So sweeping in and being the hero and failing miserably is just as fun. And those stories, this game is what I would call, I just have in my notes, a memory maker. Ooh. I have memories of this game from every time I've played it, of unique story and a thing that unfolded and kind of an in-joke or whatever it was that developed between the people that were playing the game at the time. And I can't imagine that not happening. So I can pinpoint every time I played this game that there was something different that happens. Like, oh, that was awesome. That was hilarious. That was so crazy when that happened. And I don't, I feel like you get lucky if you have that with one game. And the fact that I have 3 or 4 experiences of that already out of every game that I've played, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and And to our listeners out there, Doug is not just going to try to get a quote on the second edition of this game with his praise. I want to let you know, like, the sheets, the character sheets that everyone writes out, he has saved them. And if you know Doug, that's not quite in the norm. It's not that they would get thrown away, but I could see a book down the line of all the different characters. He's got something planned that I'm not quite sure. When you were putting the game away last time, you looked through them and you just gave yourself a little chuckle to see that level of memory making and joy in a 30-minute game that can be taught to kiddos. Now, I think we should get into some of the skills and talk about why we're both saying, 10 plus is about the floor to enter this game for if a kiddo is going to play it independently, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to get a little effusive with my praise here. Doug has a copy of this game. We don't have a copy of it yet. When we cover Gen Con, I will run to Kurt's booth at Smirk and Dagger, Kurt Covert, the owner of Smirk and Dagger, and I'm gladly gonna give my money to him because I want to take this game home. This is one that I think you said it best. It is a memory maker, and it's one that I want to show to all different types of people. People who play games, people who know when they come over to our house they're going to play a game, people who are coming over to our house for the first time and are like, oh my gosh, these people are weirdos. They have a basement full of games. This is a game that I want to play with both groups.
Yeah.
Very approachable. Very, very, very easy to get into.
Everybody's engaged the entire time while it's going on. There's no downtime. You know, everybody's paying attention to everybody's story, and the way that they build on each other is like, okay, Michael tried to do something and he failed, so now that goes into my plan, and how am I going to incorporate that and all the little stories and nuance that comes out. I think you probably need one kind of champion at the table that's invested, kind of getting into it. I don't think everybody needs to go to that level, but I think having at least one helps. So if you're the person leading the game and kind of getting into the story really helps other people get into the story. If everybody is around the table getting one-word answers, it's going to be a disaster. I think you need to have one person, and as long as you have one person, some people are going to come out of their shell. Some people are going to stay in their shell, but it's all going to work. And you can kind of play, and you can bring the other people up. That would be my only kind of caveat on this one, is that you need at least somebody that's kind of getting into it, right?
Yeah, I like how you phrase that. You need to have a champion. You need to have someone at the table who's going to lead this group towards victory, or else glorious defeat. If you really have one person who's going to take it there, man, you're going to have some fun.
And I think it can be kids too.
Yes,
I think if you just, it has to be somebody that's played it. I don't think if you throw this on the table and say, "Hey kids, go play this game," it's going to work out. But I know my daughter could take this into board game club and get people fired up about it, and she's going to be awkward, embarrassed about telling stories.
Yes.
But she's still going to be able to run it and keep it going.
And it all seemed, I mean, we have this as a family game, and I didn't break down the game as closely as you did, but it is a family game, right? There's nothing inappropriate or indecent or anything on it.
That I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't gone through everything, but there's, I guess there's some monster artwork that might be. There's a little bit of this Medusa's lair. I'd stay away from that card, but for the most part, like if you're a parent and you're playing this with kids or setting it out, you can go through beforehand.
Yeah, and I love, I talked about it in my last rant, but I love the setup of the game. I love that you get your character sheet and there's enough of clues, context, framework to work off of.
Yeah.
And I really do enjoy that role-playing aspect where my character is working off of the character that you're creating in a collaborative sense. We're not sometimes in a storytelling game, and you talk about the storytelling skill gap, but it's really who could tell the coolest story, and it's a popularity contest. And it's like, I am not competing with that professional voice actor over there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't feel that in this game. I do want to talk about why we're saying 10. And age can be, relative when you get in a game like this, but there is a level of independence and creativity that if you have, where a 4-year-old might be a gamer, might be able to generate an awesome top 10 list, but if they don't have the ability to independently read and think and kind of visualize what's happening, because you have to be able to anchor the dice roll to an event. You have to be able, there's some nuance there of what is the difference from a 15 to a 13 to a 17. And you've got to be able to use that creativity and formulate a plan in your head and then actually verbally speak that out loud so that people at the table can then infer what you're talking about. That's where I think we kind of both settle around that 10-year-old. And for us to have a family game with an entry at 10, that's also a little bit unusual, but I think it's accurate.
Yeah, and I feel like it's going to excel at 12. Right. I mean, it's capable for 10. At 12, you're going to be in a sweet spot, 12 and above, that type of thing. It's a great game, obviously, for communication, a great game for listening and forcing people to listen, the group discussion on this. One of the things that I'm looking at here is these character sheets, and you can write your most epic success and my most bitter failure at the bottom, at the end of the game. And so it's like just some of these, and some of these aren't even mine, but they're funny. Just the idea of throwing my cloak into a pit and blinding myself was my most bitter failure. But the epic success was playing an F sharp on my lightning lute.
Yeah, congratulations.
My lute
I
of
know you're
lightning.
still holding on to that.
Yeah. Most bitter failure, letting my teammate get burnt up by a dragon.
Thank
That's
you.
a real downer. Then animal companion was burnt to a crisp by a beast when I froze. Stealing toiletries while drunk. That was a little bit of a failure.
Nah, not good, Doug.
So those stories, and if you played those games with me, you know who you were and you remember those stories. Just can't give it enough praise. I'm really impressed by that. The ability to have that much structure and be loose and fun
And open. Yeah,
as much as people I'm sure could argue that this is more of an activity than a game. But while you're collecting those coins, it's fun.
Yeah, and I want to push on that just a little bit with two skills that can kind of parse apart that activity game argument, which we could spend the next half hour talking about. But one is creativity. We define creativity as a game in which players produce original ideas that may be useful in solving problems, communicating, and entertaining. And to our listeners, such as Counselor Mike, who have been with us since the start, you will know that back in 2021, Doug and I would argue about creativity over and over, whether it was in a game. Creativity is in this game in abundance because you have to use it to solve problems. So I love the way that the creativity and the problem solving works to produce a score, right? The better you do at being creative and helping your group solve a problem, the better you're actually going to score.
Yep. No, that's awesome. And it's a great skill that not only are you solving problems, but the entertainment factor of just almost by default, right? Without much effort, you're getting that in there. I think this is a great game for after school. It's a great family game night, and it's a great game night, and it's a great party game night. Like there's also, we didn't even talk about it, but there's kind of a party mode on the front, which is basically just one person asking a question, the other person guessing, and then you kind of move on, and there's no scenario type of thing. It's called Quick Start Tavern Rules. So
plays up to 8. Minimum of 3, plays up to 8.
Yeah, really awesome game. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, that was
pretty
really
glowing
good.
about it. So that is our game of the week, Adventure Party, the role-playing party game from Smirk and Dagger Games. Check that one out if you get a chance.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we discuss icons versus text. Classic showdown. Doug, lead us into this segment.
So this is something that more and more publishers and designers are trying to do, or it's certainly a goal that they want to have, which is if I use more icons, I can make a game more language independent. I can print one copy of the game and it can go all the way around the world, and the only thing I need to change is the directions, right? The instructions or rule book, as opposed to printing out a completely different set of cards for English and German and things like that, which is awesome. And there are a lot of games where that works amazing. But I guess at what point does that become an issue? When does text become necessary that it can be done by icons alone? I think if you're going to do a game that has, I almost want to say like 9 to 10 icons for me is probably the limit before I get to a point that I need everybody at the table needs to have their own player aid with those 9 icons on them and what they mean. And not, there's a bunch of games that do it where it's like, here's all the icons, but it's on the back of the rule book. And then everybody is just passing that rule book around. And then if you get to a point where you can't fit it on the player aid and it only lives in the rule book, I almost feel like at that point you need to go to text. And you're kind of deleting or defeating the purpose when you have too many icons, and trying to convey complex issues through a series of icons can really become a disaster.
Yeah, it could be cumbersome. And so you're talking about from a designer and publisher perspective, you can really see the value if you can get to an icon-only game, right?
Yeah.
And from a player's perspective, I need text for learning, and I enjoy icons for mastery. So I need those words so that I can learn the game and see how things fit together. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my play style. But then those icons, once I have the text down, I know the mechanics, then the icons help me to short circuit the text. So in some ways, I want both. Can we get into specific games here or not? All right.
Yeah.
So I could think of one game that I've played about not a half dozen, but 3 or 4 times in the last 3 or 4 months, and that's Three Ring Circus from Devere. And they have really good icons that take a little bit of time to get used to. Their rule books, when you get the game, there's like 6 different language rule books in there. My game only has the English rule book now because it's my game, but
Guess you're not trading it with someone
I
from
am
France.
not. No, I'm keeping that thing. But the rule book does a really nice job, and then there are good reference cards to break down the icons, but it takes some time. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but not cumbersome to the point where it prevents me from playing the game. We have played other games recently where there's only icons, and I am unable to play that game because of the amount of grime that my hands have put on the rule book because I'm just shuffling through it ad nauseum.
Well, and I guess the thing is it's not unique to you. So anybody that is a longtime listener of the podcast knows that Michael has color issues sometimes. It's not a situation of you don't understand the icons. It's a thing where it becomes unplayable because everybody at the table needs to look at the rule book because the icons are so unclear that make it basically unplayable, because it's all right, I just got these new cards in my hand. Hand me the rule book so I can see what they actually do, and then I'll do my turn, and then you get new cards in your hand, and we have to go through the whole process again. And that's when it kind of gets frustrating. So in a comparison, there is a game from Stefan Feld called Bruges. It came out from Z-Man Games. And it was published. It has icons on the side, and each card has its own unique ability that was written in text. And Queen Games published Hamburg, which was a re-implementation of Bruges in which they, added some things, kind of tried to clean some things up and
Put the expansion in with the base game.
Yeah, different things like that. And their initial printing did not include text on the cards.
On multi-use cards
On
where
multi-use
you'll have
cards
4 or 5 different
and
things
each
happen.
card has an ability. So you're talking about 150 cards in the game, each with their own ability, all trying to be represented by icons. And it doesn't work because, and they printed one with English, but it's still very cumbersome. And I always wonder where is that dividing line of, I get the idea of wanting to be language independent, and I think it's awesome, but where does it constrict the actual playing of the game? And I like your idea of, I need the text until I master it. And maybe you don't even need the text on the cards. You just need a good player aid until you understand what the symbols are. And once you play a game 3 or 4 times, you pretty much got an idea of what the icons do.
Yeah.
And you can kind of piece them together. But that's after 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
So if I can't get to it in the first play, and it just seems like a real slog trying to learn all of these icons, it can be a real disaster. Like Seven Wonders is a game that is on the edge. And I'm well aware that I have a better understanding of the iconography than a lot of people. And in their most recent versions, they do have player aids. So you're not passing the rules about.
The initial versions didn't?
No, it was just on the back. I think it was just on the back cover.
Of the rule book. Okay.
But of course, as you add expansions, there's more icons and stuff like that. And I think the ones that are in the base game are pretty comprehensible. There's nothing that's really bizarre. There's only a handful that you might have to look up once you kind of get into it. But and a lot of them are variations of the same thing. So it's like there's a game that I think is kind of on the edge, but it works. There's a game like Hamburg, which I think is, the wagon flew off into the canyon. And then there's other ones where it works because there's 5 or 6 symbols, and once you know them, you're off and running, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And where I think it works well is when the icons match the theme and the mechanics of what's actually happening on the board and in my hand. And so sometimes a heavier game, a hobby level game, will have a tremendous amount of icons. However, they are very clear and consistent across the board, across the card set. And yeah, they've got a lot of icons, but it's very logical how they vary, and the icons vary consistently. So I know that is going to give me money. That is going, if I produce this good, I'm going to move up that track. And so there can be just a great logical nature that when the icons work well. But man, the language independence gone too far. The icons without any text, it has rendered more than one game unplayable for us, to the point where we want to talk about it. This is not a segment that we would usually bring up, but we know that we know we have at least a few designers that listen, because we have designer friends that listen to our podcast, and some of it is designer beware, but we're also very interested about the players and the gamers and the publishers who are in our Discord. And where do you land on this? Are we off? Are you seeing this? When you talk about someone like an Ian O'Toole, and you can see, and Vincent Dutrait is another one, an artist and a graphic designer, where their icons oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes will really elevate the gameplay and decrease the barrier to learning the game.
Well,
now,
that's what. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, take
I
it.
I was going to talk about when we were talking to Chris Leader last week, and we was talking about revising and editing rule books and making sure that they're clear. It's like that's another component that I think gets overlooked, is the idea of, and you talked about it with a good designer, a good graphic designer, is when that once over and making sure that your icons, it's like, fine if you want to take the language out, but they better be clear with no cross confusion, where it's like sometimes like, oh, it's the same icon, but this one is in an octagon, and this one is in a triangle, and this is one in a circle. And because of the shape, it means they're all different things. It's like, no, just make them different icons.
Yeah.
And like that simple edit of like, you got to have somebody play the game that's unfamiliar with it, because once you learn that code, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
You don't know what it's like to be a new
so
player
that's
again.
the importance of blind play testing that Chris Leader was talking about last week. Yeah, that's great connection.
So, yeah, Michael made a good point there. Let us know on the. Do you have anything else on this one?
No, it's one that I think we'll continue to talk about as games continue to push this envelope, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's something that we'll continue to loop back to.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the fiscal reason for it. I understand the kind of altruistic reason of why you would want that to be a thing. The lofty goals of having a language independent game and all of those things, and I guess where it works and where it doesn't. When does it cross the line and when is it perfect? Is a really interesting topic and something that we look at when we're reviewing games and playing games, and how easy is this to pick up. So we'd love to hear what you guys think over in the Discord, and let us know if we're off base or what games either you think do this really well or you've struggled with. We'd be happy to hear about it. So let's move on to the high five. If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out. This week, Michael and I are going to share our high five favorite designers. These are, as far as making the list, these are kind of, for me, designers that have a proven track record for me. So ones that there are certainly one-off games or a designer that's designed a couple that it's like, oh, I think I might like this. It's almost like dating. I think I might want to be in a relationship with this designer. These are ones that I've vetted and have passed the test more than once that are on my list. And I have one honorable mention that will probably be 12 honorable mentions. Yeah. You're loosey goosey. You're all over the place. You love designers.
I got a nice tight list of 5 though. Go ahead.
So I've got one on my honorable mention, and when Michael says it, I will tell you, because I'm confident it'll be on his list, and it'll probably surprise him that it is on my honorable mentions. So, anything else you want to add before we start?
So yeah, where I really started with this list, I had a tough time, and I had a tough time as I was prepping for this podcast. So what I had to distill it down to, who are designers where I have multiple titles in my top 25. I just almost had to narrow it down, like, okay, that game's in my top 25, that game's in my top 25, both by the same designer, because I follow designers. I'm a fan of designers. I like to try designers, games of designers that I like. So this was really a tough list for me to put together. Number 5 for me is Jamie Stegmaier. The owner of Stonemaier Games, and I love Scythe, and Tapestry is one of my all-time favorite games, and Tapestry is something that I'm a completionist on, and it's one of those where I hope they don't make any more expansions because I don't have a big enough shelf to fit on. I like where it sits right now, but those 2 titles alone put him in my top 5. I don't love everything that he's made. I shared earlier in the episode, Expeditions is a game I'll be moving on from, the sequel to Scythe. But, man, I love Scythe, and I absolutely love Tapestry as a game. My biggest complaint is that I don't get to play it enough. Yeah. And when that's my biggest gripe and concern, a little rant here. Not too long ago, I walked into Game Schooler headquarters, and Doug was putting together the folded space insert for Tapestry, and I was like, ooh, look at that's over there. Oh, that means we might get to play that game again soon. And so that's my number.
Right back up, put it away.
Yeah, there you go. That's my number 5 for me is Jamie Stegmaier.
Yeah, well, and I think it goes without saying that every one of these designers on my list have games that I don't care for. But they all happen to be ones that I could think of off the top of my head, that I knew I had a lot of their games in my collection. And my number 5 is Paolo Mori. He is a designer of Ethnos and Arceus Society, which are the same type of games. Rise of Augustus, the new one, Captain Flip, and Unusual Suspects. There's something about his designs that seem to be fairly simple and elegant, straightforward that I really enjoy. Not on my list, and sorry if I'm stealing your thunder on this, Michael, but kind of reminds me of an Emerson Matsuuchi, if you are a fan of his. These are very kind of similar designers, I would think. And then even a game like Libertalia, which I'm not a fan of the new version, but I enjoyed the original one, which can be kind of mean and cutthroat. And so that is my number 5, Paulo More.
Yeah, awesome. Boy, this is going to be such a great list to just hear about people who've brought a lot of joy to both of our homes. And number 4 for me is Uwe Rosenberg. Bonanza was one of the first games that I really played with my wife and her family and our friends, jeepers, almost 20 years ago now. And the game's much older than that, but planting beans in a field, the unique thing about Bonanza, what do you mean I can't move where the cards are and I'm stuck with them? And then, I can purchase another field over here. And it's okay. So you got Bonanza all the way down to Agricola, which is just a wild game of a single micro action cascading into other actions on my farm. And I have to I've got to feed things or they die. What's going on here? This doesn't feel like Bonanza. And so the scope, and then very recently, and I'm fairly certain this will be a game of the week here sooner rather than later, Tangram City, which just came out from Capstone Games. Just the scope of Uwe games. And I haven't played all of them. Mean, I got a dozen Uwe games that I want to try. And so he's number 4 for me.
All right, cool. I'm going to describe something, and you tell me if you can guess the designer that is in my number 4. This designer has created 2 of my favorite dice chucking games, 2 of my favorite party games, and I am not a fan of his most popular game.
Phil Walker Harding?
Richard Garfield.
Oh, Sir Richard Garfield. Yep.
So I have no knowledge of Magic the Gathering, outside of that it exists. I've looked at it. I don't understand it. It seems so cumbersome to me, which Magic the Gathering players are like, oh, you simpleton, it's so easy. But he has designed King of Tokyo and Dice Hunters of Therion, which are 2 of my favorite dice chucking games if I want to get just rolling dice. And then he designed Hive Mind and Half Truth, which are both 2 of my favorite party-style games and trivia game with Half Truth, and just the idea of, like, you don't have to know everything in a great a trivia-style game. He designed Treasure Hunter, which is a cool drafting game, Keyforge, which was his answer to not deck building in Magic the Gathering. And so just a great designer. I'm sure I'm missing Bunny Kingdom. Forgot to put Bunny Kingdom on the list, but so there are two of my favorite drafting games, Treasure Hunter and Bunny Kingdom. So when he does it, I feel like he does it really well, and I haven't even played Robo Rally and some of the other games that he's done. So that's my number 4, Richard Garfield.
Yeah, that's excellent. I had him at number 6, and I don't have 12 designers at 6. I did put an ordered list. This was a tough one. Number 3 for me is Phil Walker Harding. I don't know if I need to say a whole lot more than that. We've done 6 or 7 of his games as games of the week. I'm always interested in what he's coming out with. Right behind me, I have Cities, which is a collab from Phil Walker Harding and Steve Finn, and I'm trying to play that at every player count because I want to, I kind of like to get, I don't want to say inside Phil Walker Harding's head. I'm not saying that, but I feel like the games shift based on the number of players, the types of players, and the ages of the players. And I really like that about his games that we've covered. I'll take do you have him coming up or no? Is he honorable mention for you?
I do. He is on my list.
Then I'll just pause. But I know we've done, not just Sushi Go, but we've also talked about Scribbly Gum from Joey Games, which he and his wife published, and his wife did the art and graphic design on, and it's just a fantastic game, little flip and write game. Silver and Gold is in the Game Schooler Hall of Fame if we ever had one. So he's number 3 for me. I've got way too many of his games sitting behind me on a shelf. And so I'll pass it over to you so I don't just talk about all things Phil Walker Harding.
Sure. My number 3 is a designer that I'm trying to look up right now, just actually what his most recent ones are, because it's one that is more of a little bit of a nostalgia pick for me, which is Bruno Catala. The designer of King Domino, Mission Bread Planet is an awesome game, Jamaica, Dice Town, Abyss, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, Shadows over Camelot, which I wish would be reprinted, Jamaica. And one of the things he's done really well recently is helping on some 2-player versions of games, such as Seven Wonders Duel, which is awesome, and Splendor Duel,
Awesome.
and helping those type of games out as well. Those, like I said, those are some of his more recent ones, and I haven't played much of his things after that. So certainly something that I've enjoyed his games in the past, and there's part of it where it's like almost like credit due for the amount of influence he had on getting me into the hobby and the games that I was playing when I started gaming. So that's my number 3, Bruno Catala.
Awesome. My number 2, my second favorite designer at the moment today is John DeClaire. I love, and some of it is certainly a recency bias. I had played a game with my nephew and my brother-in-law of Space Base in the last half year, and it was just magic. It was just great to see my 8 or 9-year-old nephew just take it over, and that's a game where you're rolling dice and you're activating different bases, all the way down to Dead Reckoning, which I've talked about recently, because that has a card crafting system, which can also be found in Mystic Vale. And then down to like a party game such as Ready, Set, Bet. And I really like and pay attention to games that he's making. And I like the chances that he takes. Not all of his games have worked for me, but I do enjoy that he mixes up mechanics in a way that still creates a fun game, oftentimes. And so that's a designer that I also have a little stack of games on a nice Calyx, and was, as I was going through this list today, I was like, yeah, he's got about at least 3 games right now in my top 25. So he's getting in that number 2 spot.
All right. Yeah, that's I thought he would be on your list. That is for sure. My number 2, second favorite designer, is Antoine Bauza. He's a designer of Seven Wonders Architect, Tokaido, Ghost Stories, Terror in Meeple City, Mystery Express, which is one of my favorite deduction games that I hardly ever get to play. He did Namiji and
Tokaido.
yeah, and Takenoko is another one. So a lot of games in that family weight category, with Draftosaurus with a little bit of crunchiness, and so he seems to be another designer that kind of lands in my sweet spot. Nothing is overly heavy and complicated, but there's enough to sink my teeth in, which is what I love about a designer. And so that's my number 2, Antoine Bauza.
Nice. If my 8-year-old were here and I asked her, hey, who's my favorite designer? Rainer Knizia. And I said, who? Dr. Rainer Knizia. Yeah, he is my favorite designer, and it might not be a popular choice from a lot of other, listeners, content creators, but I tell you what, I love so many of his games. Certainly not all 689. And maybe it's up to 691 now. I haven't looked for a few days, but the range of games from card games with an Uno mechanic such as Llama, up to a two-player tug-of-war battles of shot and totten to he has his own mechanic or scoring mechanism that's commonly known in the hobby. Oh, that's a Knizia mechanism where you've got to be the leader in one area or score a minimum in an area to even win. Otherwise, you lose. And so I like a lot of his games. Not all, certainly. And what I've noticed too, Doug, and maybe it's only interesting to you and me here, but like his tile placing games, I'm not very good at a lot of them. Like some of his games that really require that spatial perception and strategy to chart a course, I'm not as good, but I enjoy playing them.
Yeah.
And so that's I love what he does with auction and bidding too with some of his games as well. He is my favorite designer of the moment.
Well, it will shock you, but he would have been on my list, which you probably wouldn't think based on the amount of garbage I give you about him. But I didn't put him on my list because I knew you would be talking about him.
Okay.
So if you weren't going to be talking about him, he would be in my top 5. I'm not exactly sure, but I do love a lot of his games, whether you're talking about his 2-player games and, I do feel like there's some stuff that's redundant, but there is a lot of solid stuff, whether it's Quest for El Dorado and some of those games. It's like I do enjoy a lot of the ability to pick up and start playing right away. And games like Llama and Shot and Totten and Lost Cities are my 2 favorite 2-player games of all time. So
yeah, and even some of his newer titles, I think, are why he is at the top of my list. I really enjoy Sunrise Lane. I really enjoy that little game from Horrible Guild with nice cards and the decision space in there that I can play with my 8-year-old, I can play with my wife, I can play with my game group, I can play with you. He's my favorite designer.
And my number 1 is going to be Phil Walker Harding. Just as far as the personal, and I know from a podcast standpoint, anytime he's got a new game coming out, I'm interested. And they're not all winners, but the ones that really hit, you're talking about Sushi Go and Baron Park, Gizmos, Silver and Gold, Planted, Summer Camp, games that just seem to fit. Scribbly Gum you talked about, the ones that fit into that just perfect little family niche of being approachable for younger players and have enough depth on the back end to make it interesting for the adults and adult gamers and gamers playing at the table. That I think he just does such a good job at that of whether it's development or getting rid of all of the extraneous stuff that's unnecessary. All the kludge out of the design is taken care of.
Yeah.
And that's why he's at the top of my list, Phil Walker Harding.
Awesome. Man, I've got a stack of honorable mention. A lot of designers who have multiple games in my top 25, so maybe I'm not very good at math, but I had Richard Garfield and Gavin Brown of Roxley fame.
Yep.
And then Stefan Feld and Elizabeth Hargrave, all right there with Paul Denon from Direwolf Studios. I think some of them, it's just I haven't played their games as much.
Yeah.
But boy, I really love the whole Wingspan series, and I also enjoyed the Fox Experiment. So it was hard for me not to put Elizabeth Hargrave in there. Same thing with Stefan Feld. I mean, so many designers have multiple games. Not to mention the duos, the Kramer and Kieslings of the world, Halmer Hawk, Alan R. Moon. I'm glad you brought up Bruno Cathala, Rob Davio, Luke Lowry. So many great designers, hard to just get 5, but I'm glad that we got to showcase some designers today.
Yeah, no, awesome list. And love to hear what designers kind of get you interested and pique your interest when you hear that they've got a new game coming out. Share that in the Discord server. Subscribe to us on the podcast. Follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. Again, the Game Schooler is Discord is gameschooler.com/Discord. Next week, we're going to be talking about Kabanga. We're going to talk about a little bit about the Spiel des Jahres and what they get right and maybe don't get right. And then we're going to be talking about some of our favorite components that we like to have upgraded So we're going to chat about that next week. Thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.